I don't know if you've ever been to the desert. Maybe you've traveled and seen a desert. Maybe you've traveled across the southwest part of our country and seen the Grand Canyon or Zion National Park or Joshua Tree, Death Valley, these places that are desert, right? There's very little life that's there. They're beautiful in their own way, but they are dry and desolate, and there's not much to see. A couple years ago, I was flying from Atlanta to Las Vegas for a church meeting because even church meetings can't resist the cheap hotel rooms in Vegas. And so I was flying across the country, and I had a window seat and was watching this unbelievable landscape unfold. And while it was beautiful, it was barren and desolate, and there wasn't much there. It's incredible to think that while there may not be much there to our eye, there are moments when the desert comes to life in beautiful ways. I don't know if you saw this past spring, but there was a super bloom in California. The deserts of California had just the right amount of rain and the right weather conditions, and these seeds that had laid dormant for years began to come to life, and flowers burst forth in places where there had been dry, desolate desert. You could see the flowers from space. There was so much beauty and color and so much just life that seemed to burst forth. These seeds that had lain for maybe years and endured the harsh conditions of the desert suddenly burst forth with this beautiful life. If you haven't seen pictures of the super bloom, there's one up there, but if you haven't seen pictures, you should give it a Google and check it out because it really is just this incredible thing. I think that's what the prophet Isaiah is seeing as he lays out this prophecy for the people of God, as he kind of calls them to this new life. He is laying out this prophecy of the ways that the dry, desolate places will come to life. He's giving us this vivid imagery of what it's going to look like when God comes to be among us. And throughout Advent, we've read these prophecies of Isaiah, who is breaking down the weapons of violence used against each other, who's breaking down the ways that creation fights against each other, and who's calling us in this text to understand that when God comes, everything is different. We read these texts in Advent because Advent is the season where we begin to hold to this deep hope that God is coming. That is the whole message of Advent. God is coming. God is coming to be among us. In just a few short days, we're going to celebrate Christmas, which is the remembrance that God came to live among us as a little baby, to walk among us, to show us the way to be and the way to live, that God came to experience what we experience and to offer us hope. But more than that, God is coming again. There is this hope that we have for a future that is not yet seen. God will come again and make all things right. God will come again and begin to bring forth this new way of being. And in Advent, we look for and long for and hope for that. We remember that hope and peace and joy are possible because God is coming. As Pastor Mike said, this is Gaudete Sunday. This is Joy Sunday, where we remember that the joy that God has brought us is deep and sustains us even in the midst of difficulty and darkness. The joy that God brings continues to give us life. And that's how this passage starts. When the prophet says, the desert will rejoice and break forth in flowers. Maybe in our neck of the woods, we would say the strip mine will bring forth lavender. Have you heard about this? In places across the state, after they finish strip mining, they come in and begin to plant lavender, and there are lavender fields that are popping up and bringing about new life. There's this beautiful image that God gives us of things being made new. This beautiful image that God gives us of things being brought back to life. The fact that it happens, Isaiah says, in the wilderness is kind of surprising. Because the wilderness that Isaiah is talking about is not the kind of wilderness that you and I are used to. The wilderness that Isaiah is talking about is this difficult, dark, deadly wilderness. One of my favorite places in the world is Tucker County, just a couple hours away. Blackwater Falls, Canaan Valley. I love to go there. We've gone there several times. We've hiked the Dolly Sods. We've hiked in the Monongalia National Forest. We were there this fall to see some leaves, and we hiked this trail. We drove out this Forest Service road, this little one-lane road that seemed like it was going to fall off a cliff. We got out to a place and parked our car and hiked back this overlook. There was no cell service. There were no people. We got out there to this beautiful vista, and I felt like I was the first person to have ever seen it. But there was a trail, so clearly I was not the first person who had ever seen it, right? Even in that moment where I felt like I was deep in the wilderness, we had food and water and extra snacks in the car, and it wasn't that far away, you know? This is not the kind of wilderness Isaiah is talking about. Isaiah is talking about a wilderness that is dry and barren, that is full of predators and prey, that is full of death, that is full of the things that will steal your very life. So when Isaiah says the wilderness will break forth with life, Isaiah is saying the thing that is often pointed towards death will bring forth life. Isaiah is reminding us that the wilderness is a place where God shows up. And if you read throughout the biblical text, the wilderness is the place where God shows up to teach and to comfort and to challenge. The wilderness is the place where God shows up to do incredible work. Isaiah says the wilderness will be a place where God is about to move. And this is good news for the people who hear it, because they have been in exile. They have been pulled away from their homeland. They have been enslaved in other places. They have lived the wilderness. And God says, suddenly the wilderness you have experienced will be something new. Have you ever lived in the wilderness? Have you ever lived in those places of pain and sorrow and sighing? Have you ever lived in the wilderness where things seem uncertain and it seems like the life is being sucked out of your very soul? Maybe you're living in the wilderness now. Christmas is a hard time to live in the wilderness, because Target convinces us we can be happy if we just buy their stuff. Christmas is a hard time to live in the wilderness. Maybe you are walking through this season feeling like you are walking in the wilderness, full of sorrow, full of loss. I talked to 2 people this week who told me how much they were not looking forward to Christmas because of the sadness that it brings. If you are living in the wilderness, hear this good news. God meets us in the wilderness. God restores the broken and dry places of our life to bring forth something new. God meets us in the wilderness to offer renewal and redemption and salvation. God inhabits the barren places of our lives to bring forth something that we wouldn't anticipate or see. God meets us in the wilderness. And friends, I'm not saying that's going to happen today. I'm not saying that's going to happen in this moment. I'm not saying in this season you have to somehow move from a wilderness experience to an experience of life and joy. Here's what I'm saying. Someday, God will show up in the wilderness experiences of your life. Someday, God will bring about something new that you haven't anticipated, because that is the work God does, and God is coming. That is the work that God does, and God is coming. So as we walk through those wilderness places, as we stand in the places that feel barren and dry and desolate, we do not give up hope. Somehow, we continue to be people of joy who have this deep sense that even in the midst of our deep darkness, God is with us. And God will make all things right. God will make all things right. God will offer us salvation, not just for us. Here's what I find pretty fascinating about this passage. God is calling the people out of exile. He's calling them from their wilderness into this new life. And he's saying to them, come with me on the road to Zion. Now, Zion is the place that they're from. Zion is in ruins. Zion has been destroyed. God is calling them and saying, come with me that we might rebuild the city of Zion, that we might rebuild the city of God. Join me in this work that I am doing to restore and renew the world. God is calling and tugging and pulling the people on this journey of restoration, not just for themselves, but for all of the world. God is saying, join with me in the work that I'm doing to make things right. And he can hear the people's excuses. Do you hear this? Do you hear God speak of their excuses? Say to broken hands, be strong. Say to feeble knees, walk right. Say to those who live in fear that their God is about to come. God hears the excuses of the people who say, I'm not sure we can do the work. And God says, because of who I am, the work of redemption, the work of renewal, the work of making all things right can and will continue to happen. We are invited by God to join in this journey of restoring and renewing all things, of seeing life break forth in surprising places, of experiencing the glory of God that is more than what we could have imagined. We are invited to see the work of God that heals the wounds that we carry. You see, this messianic promise, this messianic hope includes this section where God says, the dumb will hear and the blind will see. People will be restored. And God is talking to people who have been pulled into exile. And while in exile, they have been intentionally maimed and blinded. They have been placed in servitude. They have experienced pain and hurt that is deep and real and physical. And God says to them who have experienced that deep physical pain, who have lost their sight or lost their hearing because of the wounds inflicted by someone else, even that I can heal. Because God is a God who heals the deep wounds that we carry. Because God is a God who renews and restores and to make things right. Maybe this season you feel like you carry a deep wound. Maybe this season it feels like it just comes right to the surface. God is a God who heals our brokenness. God is a God who restores and renews. May you know the God who brings joy in the midst of the desert. God invites the people on this journey and says, in the midst of this desolate land, there will be a road that is wide, a road that you can't get off of, a road that even if you're foolish, you can't make the wrong turn. God says there will be a road that is not filled with predators or prey, large potholes. Instead, there will be a road that leads to life. God invites us to join God on the journey of walking the road, of seeing life come in surprising ways, and of announcing God's reign. God is still bringing new life to the world. And let me tell you how I know this. I read this week that as preachers, we don't do a very good job of naming God's glory. We do a much better job of naming the world's brokenness. So I want to tell you this week how I have seen God's glory lived out in powerful ways. How I know that God is not done renewing and restoring all things and bringing life to wilderness places. I know that because one of my friends who has lived on the street for over 20 years has a place to live today. He ended up having a house that he never thought he would get, an apartment that's his own, and he has celebrated that, and I celebrate with him. I know that because I have seen people who have walked and struggled with addiction and brokenness find healing and wholeness that they never knew was possible, not through their own strength, but because God is a God who makes things new. I know that because I have watched people who retired from their work and instead of living a comfortable life, have joined in God's work in surprising ways ways that they would have never anticipated. And suddenly they are involved in the good things that God is doing. I know that because I get to brag about you on a weekly basis. This week I stood with someone who was real skeptical about church and talked about this church and the ways that we serve and the ways that we work and the ways that we try and care for our community. And she said to me, "You have some pretty good people." And I said, "I sure do." Because when we work together, we announce God's reign and God's glory. God is bringing new life. May we be people who are filled with that joy and that hope. And may we continue to join God in announcing that new way.